Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Betsy Kim, and I have the honor of introducing our first speaker this morning, Deputy Secretary Chris Liu. Chris was sworn in as Deputy Secretary just 5 short weeks ago. In those 5 weeks, he has already traveled with the President. I think that happened on day 2. Presided over numerous meetings with DOL agency heads and other staff, and most impressively, has eaten in the DOL cafeteria at least 5 or 6 times. We are so fortunate to have Chris here at the Department of Labor. As most of you know, before he came here, his previous position was at the White House, where he served for 4 years as Cabinet Secretary and Assistant to the President. He also served as co-chair of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. He was and continues to be one of the highest-ranking Asian Americans in the Obama administration. I feel very privileged to work with the Deputy Secretary on a daily basis. Every day, I see the commitment he has to moving the workforce agenda forward. Both he and Secretary Perez have shown a genuine appreciation for the issues that workers face every day. And finally, the humility with which he approaches his position would make his Chinese parents so proud. It gives me great pleasure to present Deputy Secretary Chris Liu.
Thank you. Thank you all. It is so great to be here. As I look around, I see so many friends who I've seen multiple times this week at various events, and I suspect I'm going to be seeing you many more times this month. Welcome to the Department of Labor as we commemorate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I also want to welcome all the DOL employees from across the country who are joining us via a live stream webcast. We are also thrilled to have C-SPAN here today, covering the event so that this important commemoration can be seen by viewers across the world. As the Deputy Secretary of Labor, as a proud member of the Obama administration, and as the son of Chinese American immigrants, it is an incredible privilege to be here today as we induct the Chinese railroad workers into the Labor Hall of Honor. We gather today to honor a group of workers who helped build our nation, workers who are in no small measure responsible for one of the largest economic expansions in our country, and really one of the most significant historic accomplishments. Now, growing up, this is not a history I learned in school, and that's a shame. So my hope is that by sharing the history of these 12,000 workers, we can help to repay some of the debt we owe to generations of immigrants who helped build this country. Now, even though these workers, on average, measured about 5 feet tall and weighed about 100 pounds, it was said that they could produce twice the output of ordinary men. But they were not just hard workers, they were also brilliant engineers and craftsmen who understood how to build a railroad that crossed rivers, crossed valleys, and would wrap around mountains. And when they couldn't go around a mountain, they would blast their way through. Now, this work was dangerous, because back in the day, if you wanted to light an explosive, you had to plant the explosive, you had to light it, and then you had to run away before it went off. And the work was so hazardous that the workers were said to have had a Chinaman's chance of surviving, which was not much chance at all. So what was their reward for a job well done? Their success provoked a wave of backlash, the so-called Yellow Peril, that was supposedly taking away jobs from Americans. And in 1882, a little over a decade after they completed the Transcontinental Railroad, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which essentially stopped the immigration of Chinese into this country, actually Asians into this country, for about 80 years. Only when those restrictive immigration rights were undone in the 1960s were immigrants like my parents able to become U.S. citizens. So today we begin to right an old wrong. We extend the much belated thanks of a grateful nation, and we afford these incredible pioneers their well-deserved place in American history. The story of the Chinese railroad workers touches on many aspects of the work that we do in the modern-day Labor Department. From our health and safety programs, our enforcement of wage and discrimination laws, we are still confronting many of the challenges faced by these workers a century and a half ago. The story of these workers and their contributions to our nations also reminds all Americans that we have benefited from wave after wave of industrious immigrants. Now, in immigrant families, there's a special place of honor for the first to come to the country, the first to face the unknown, the first to plant roots so that others could join them. So for the community of 18 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in this country, the Chinese railroad workers are part of our first. They pushed open a door so that generations could follow them. The story of their successes has been missing in history for far too long, and that is why we honor them today. So before we begin the program, continue the program, I want to recognize some special colleagues that are here today. First and foremost, I want to recognize our former Secretary of Transportation, former Secretary of Commerce, Norm Mineta. I want to recognize the former Chief of Staff at this wonderful department. I don't know if she's hiding. Anna Ma, who played a critical role in pushing this initiative. The selection committee at the department was comprised of Carl Felicio, Patricia Smith, Mary Beth Maxwell, and Michael Kerr. So thank you to all of them for a well-made choice. And one special person who deserves a lot of recognition is the one who has orchestrated this entire thing, which is Phil Tom, the director of our Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Some other organizations played a key role in today's commemoration: the Stanford University Chinese Railroad Workers in North America Project, the Chinese Historical Society of America, Chinese American Citizens Alliance, OCA, and the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. So let's give them a round of applause as well. And finally, all of you were entertained earlier by the incredibly talented John Jang, who shared his music with us. John is making important and unique contributions to our history and culture by giving a musical voice to Chinese American stories. So thank you, John. Lastly, the warmest welcome goes to the family members of the descendants of the Chinese railroad workers, and we have many of them here, and I hope for those that are in the audience, you have a chance to talk to them after the event. So let's give them a round of applause as well. And now it is my great pleasure and distinct honor to introduce the next speaker, my friend, a champion and trailblazer in his own right, who each and every day has a singular focus in doing more to help American workers. Please join me in welcoming Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez.
This is a great day. Thank you, Chris. Good morning. It's an honor to be here with you, and it's always an honor to be here with such remarkably distinguished people, including but not limited to one of my heroes and one of the heavyweights in the civil rights movement and the labor movement and in the movement for opportunity, Congressman Mineta, Secretary Mineta. And he embodies the adage, it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. That's what I always remember about Secretary Mineta. So thank you. And I know Congresswoman Grace Meng will be joining us. And that pesky work in the House is keeping her a little bit busy right now, but we're thrilled that she will hopefully be able to join us. And Chris, thank you for all of your leadership. This is week 5 for Chris Liu, and we are blessed to have him here. And this is week 2 or so for Portia Wu, who is our Assistant Secretary for Employment and Training, and a major part of our senior leadership team. And to Secretary Minetta's right is someone who basically turned the lights on for us, Pat Shue. And I'm hoping she's going to turn the lights off in 2017, because she's also been a champion. And so it really is an honor to be here on this incredibly important day where we are correcting a historical challenge, which is that the remarkable work that was done by a remarkable group of people has not been recognized enough across this country. And we're going to correct that, and we're going to keep correcting that. And I want to thank Phil Tom for helping us to correct that. So Phil, thank you very much. Because 145 days ago tomorrow, the word done was telegraphed to Washington, D.C., sending the word that the final spike had been driven to complete the first transcontinental railroad. It was one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the 19th century, connecting the country from coast to coast, opening the door to massive economic expansion, and changing the face of the nation. Before its completion, cross-country travel took 6 months. The railroad reduced it to a single week. That sounds like the internet of the late 19th century. It really does. Railroad officials, government leaders, and workers gathered at Promontory Summit in the Utah Territory to celebrate the milestone. But there was a conspicuous absence there, because conspicuously absent from the photos that were taken that day — hello, Deanna Jang, I saw you in the audience — was the Chinese workers whose grueling work made this possible. Nearly 12,000 Chinese immigrant laborers helped build that railroad. They were 85% of the labor force on the Central Pacific Railroad, which built the western portion of that line. Railroad officials were skeptical about hiring Chinese workers at first, but the superintendent found them to be more than capable of the work, and eventually railroad officials began recruiting them from across California as well as from overseas. And as you know, it was backbreaking, dangerous work. Many died. They were subjected to brutal working and living conditions and paid less than other laborers for their work. That was wrong then. That's wrong now. And they laid railroad tracks in the sweltering desert and in the snow-covered Sierra Nevada mountains. Several thousand of the Chinese workers found the courage to strike for better conditions. That is remarkable. The courage of these leaders is something that the nation needs to know more about. They fought for an increase in pay from $35 to $40 per month, and they fought for an 8-hour workday. Management responded by cutting off food trains to starve them out. The strike lasted about a week before a majority of the workers resumed working, and although their demands were not met, their willingness to organize and stand up for their rights in and of itself was a victory, and in and of itself was a profile in courage. And yet their commitment to the work and the sacrifices they made just have not been fully recognized. And that is why we're here today, to recognize the Chinese railroad workers who didn't just build a railroad, they helped build a nation. We're here to show our long overdue appreciation for their heroic work. But we're not only recognizing the miles and miles of railroad track that they laid, we're recognizing them as the first in a long line of AAPI workers who have contributed to America's strength and vitality. Chinese American workers planted some of the first crops in the Central Valley of California. Asian American workers were critical to the development of the West Coast fishing and canning industries. Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders helped develop the sugarcane and pineapple industries in Hawaii. Sikh workers helped in Oregon in other respects. Today we can trace a line from the Chinese railroad workers and Japanese farmers of the 19th century to generations of AAPI immigrants who continue to be an integral part of the American labor force. From Filipino healthcare workers to Korean grocers, South Asian taxi drivers, and Vietnamese nail salon workers. These low-wage and all too frequently vulnerable workers have also been a vital part of the labor movement. In 1965, when Filipino farm workers walked off the grape farms in California, they weren't just striking for their rights, they were helping to plant the seeds of a much larger movement. Filipino organizer Larry Itliong and the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee launched the Delano Strike, and soon after became half of the coalition that formed the United Farm Workers of America, a remarkable and enduring accomplishment. And you know, labor rights and civil rights are like a marathon relay. The baton gets held. The Chinese railroad workers held that baton for so long. All the other folks that I described then continued to carry that baton. And today, the tradition of AAPI workers organizing and leading the American labor movement and carrying that baton continues. Secretary Mineta carried that baton for decades through his public service and continues to be a leader in this effort. Secretary, Congressman, friend, thank you for carrying that baton and continuing to carry that baton. And thank you for inspiring a new generation of leaders, because I'll tell you, I met with a lot of folks yesterday, and they got game, and they're doing good stuff. You know, in 1992, the formation of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance marked a new day in labor and community alliance building. Aijen Pu, is she here? She better be here. Oh, there you are. Good, good. Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and we've done a lot of work together. Has been organizing Asian workers since 1996. My good friend Julie Sue, who would love to be here, the California Labor Commissioner. We did a lot of work on behalf of Thai garment workers and others who were victims of exploitation in California. And Julie continues her wonderful work in her capacity as California Labor Commissioner. This woman here, Aijen, she is a force of nature because I've seen her at work. She helped spearhead the successful passage in 2010 of New York's historic Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, and she was a critical partner in developing the final rule that we announced last year to provide minimum wage and overtime protections to home care workers, many of whom were working 80 hours a week and making $400. Do the math. That wasn't right when it happened to Chinese railroad workers, and that isn't right today when it happens to home health workers or other workers across a variety of low-wage sectors. And there are other AAPI labor leaders who are standing up for the rights of workers across the country. Leaders like Bhairavi Desai, director of the National Taxi Workers Alliance, with whom I met yesterday. Saru Jerimarma, the director of ROC, the Restaurant Opportunity Center, who was with us yesterday as well. And Sarita Gupta, director of Jobs for Justice, who that family's got serious gene pool, because we just hired her sister, Pronita, and I hope Pronita's here. Where are you, Pronita? If you're not here, she's here somewhere. I know I saw her before. And so there is a remarkable line of leaders across this country. And here at the Labor Department, we are working with these advocates and so many others to address all of these issues confronting our communities. Today, even as we celebrate our past, as we're going to do and continue to do here today, we tackle with great resolve the challenges of the present and the future. And we will continue to do so. And whether it's organizing domestic workers, addressing the needs of cab drivers of South Asian descent, ensuring the safety of nail salon employees, we at the Department of Labor are the Department of Opportunity. We're here to work to ensure that when you work a full day's wage, a day's work, you get paid for that work. We're here to ensure that your conditions are safe. We're here to ensure that opportunity abounds for anybody willing to work hard and play by the rules. And that's precisely what you do day in and day out. And I'm very excited about our interagency partnership with the EEOC and the Justice Department that Chris Liu is leading, a new vulnerable worker project that will focus on advancing employment and labor protections for AAPI communities. We'll continue to conduct a joint series of listening sessions around the country, and our listening sessions are intended to ensure that everybody who is working is protected, that everybody who works a full day gets paid for that work, and that we make sure that the opportunity society that Secretary Mineta fought so hard to fulfill is continuing to be fulfilled. And we will, of course, in building that opportunity society, continue to push tirelessly for the issue that is one of the most important issues of our day, which is passing comprehensive immigration reform. You know, as the son of Dominican immigrants, I spent many nights at the dinner table talking about politics, because politics transformed the life of our family, because my mother and my father were forced to leave the Dominican Republic as the result of a brutal dictator. And like all of you, America gave us opportunity. America told us that if you work hard and play by the rules, the sky's the limit. And throughout our nation's history, as we are marking today, immigrants have been coming here seeking prosperity, opportunity, liberty, and access to equality. That's the story of the Chinese railroad workers. They, like so many before them, gave everything for a chance to share in the prosperity of our growing nation. They overcame persecution and intolerance, just as many new immigrants today confront the same things. This is not just an immigrant workers' rights story. This is a story about civil rights, about human rights. We are indeed a nation of immigrants, and as we have received assistance and hospitality upon our arrival, my parents taught me, Secretary Mineta teaches us every single day, that it is our obligation to make sure that the ladder of opportunity is open to everyone. It's not an escalator of opportunity. There are no free rides. You work your way up that ladder. That's exactly what the Chinese railroad workers did. That's exactly what taxi drivers in New York City, domestic workers across this country, home health workers across this country are trying to do. And we need to fix our broken immigration system so that we can move people out of the shadows and into the sunshine. And we will continue to do that, because that is some of the key unfinished business of our time. And I am confident that were we able to get into that time machine and turn the clock back and have conversations the day that they were marking the completion, the day that Chinese workers were omitted from those photographs, what they would be telling us, I am confident, is keep up the fight. Keep up the good work. Make sure you're fighting for opportunity for my great-grandchild. And not only for my Chinese American grandchild, but for people of all races. Because we're all in this together as a nation. That's what they taught us, and that's what we're going to continue to do. And so it is a great honor to recognize these remarkable people into a very esteemed group, the Hall of Honor, whose members include Francis Perkins, Cesar Chavez, Helen Keller, Justin Dart, A. Philip Randolph, among others. But I will tell you one thing. The Hall of Honor has never before included a representative from the AAPI community. That is, until now. So let's get on with it. So I would like to ask a favor. If the living representatives of the Chinese railroad workers, who are, I think, in the front rows here, and other living representatives, can the living representatives in the front, can they join me on stage? Come on. Hey, Chris and Portia and Seema, can you join us as well? And Mr. Secretary, could I impose on you and Pat to your right to join us, and Seema? Can I ask the other, are there other representatives of the family members? Are you here? If I could ask you to stand, if there are others. Okay. Well, hey, Phil, you can't hide, man. Phil Tom is one of these people who is what we call in the business a servant leader, you know? He toils in anonymity, and he needs to be acknowledged. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as the United States Secretary of Labor, it is my privilege today to recognize your ancestors for their historic role in building this great nation and advancing the labor movement in the United States. They took on the arduous task of completing the western section of the Transcontinental Railroad, laying the foundation for the extraordinary American prosperity that would follow. Many of them perished from harsh winters and dangerous working conditions. Many who survived faced prejudice, low wages, and social isolation, but they courageously took a stand to organize for fair wages and safe working conditions. They not only connected our nation, they advanced the cause of good, safe jobs for all workers, immigrant and native-born workers alike. This month, as we celebrate 145 years since the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and Anna Ma, could you please come up here? I just saw you out of the corner of my eye. We honor these pioneers for their sacrifice and perseverance. We honor them for insisting on respect and dignity for those who perform this country's most difficult jobs. So on behalf of the President of the United States and the United States Department of Labor, on this day, May the 9th, 2014, I hereby, in one of the great privileges that I have had in my 9 months of the job, induct the roughly 12,000 Chinese railroad workers of 1865 to 1869 into the Labor Hall of Honor. They have made our country and community proud. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Connie Young Yu, who will speak on behalf of the descendants of the Chinese railroad workers. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Perez. I expected all this honoring and this awesome crowd and being with everybody, but I didn't expect to be so moved. I think with his remarks, Secretary Perez has made it right. Because 45 years ago, my parents went to Promontory for the 100th anniversary of the completion of the railroad, and the Secretary of Transportation totally ignored the fact that Chinese worked on the railroads, because he said, who but Americans could have tunneled through the summit in the Sierras? Who but Americans could have built 10 miles of track in one day? So this is an awesome moment. And the other awesome thing for me is that yesterday I flew in from Norman Y. Mineta Airport, and I'm here today, and Norman Mineta's here on the program, and I knew him as a mayor, and now, of course, we all know him as a great, great man. So, as representative of the descendants of Chinese workers on the Transcontinental Railroad, I wish to thank Secretary Perez, Chris Liu, and the Department of Labor Selection Committee for this historic occasion and making possible the induction of Chinese laborers into the Hall of Honor. I'm thrilled to see my fellow descendants present from all parts of the country, the great-grandchildren of Chin Lin Su, the 6-foot-tall railroad foreman who settled in Denver, Colorado, the descendants of workers who became farm workers on the farmers and farm workers on the West Coast, and the Lee family whose ancestors rode the rails to New York City to begin new ventures. There are many, many descendants who do not know their ancestors were part of this great American enterprise. It was buried in U.S. history, hidden by Chinese communities themselves, because there was a time when a Chinese laborer was of the lowest class of human being in America. After the railroad's completion, there was no longer demand for Chinese workers, only that the Chinese must go. There were labor riots, the burnings of Chinatowns, and most devastating of all, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This federal law prohibited the entry of Chinese laborers and denied the right of naturalization to citizenship to persons of the Chinese race. The Chinese workers who remained to call this country their home could not become Americans, but they knew their sons and daughters could. My great-grandfather left a very poor village in South China, and he arrived in Gumsan, America, at the age of 19 in 1866. He was a contract laborer for the Central Pacific. He acquired building skills, a few words of English, and learned about teamwork, and that it was possible, despite the hardships, despite the racism, to survive and to dream of a better life. He took the train to San Francisco and worked in a general store. He became the manager and sent for his wife and started a family. The railroad gave him this foothold in America. But despite being born in America, his sons traveling on business were treated like aliens, interrogated and detained. In his immigration testimonies on their behalf, my great-grandfather declared he was a merchant, never a laborer, not even that he was a foreman on the Transcontinental Railroad. It was only through oral history, his telling the true story to his son, who told his daughter, my mother, who told me, that I know my ancestor, Li Wang Sang, worked on the Iron Road. The Chinese building the railroad finally has its rightful place in U.S. history. Thank you to all of you. The Department The Department of Labor has written it on the wall, and it cannot be denied or erased. This is an enduring legacy that belongs to the whole of American society, and we should all be so proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie, again for being here with us and sharing with us the wonderful story about your family. I now want to welcome one of the newest members of the Department of Labor team to the stage. Given, as the Secretary said, I've only been here 5 weeks, I don't often get to say that. But our next speaker is Portia Wu, who is the new Assistant Secretary for Employment and Training. And while Portia is new to the department, she is not new to this administration. She is not new to the world of advocating for workers. She previously served as Special Assistant to the President, advising on labor and workforce issues. She also is a veteran of the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. Please welcome Assistant Secretary Portia Wu.
I actually think we're starting our panel now. So and then Pat should come up. And I hope we're going to be joined by Congresswoman Meng if she's available, but she has votes in the House right now, as was mentioned previously. So I'll do brief introductions, and then we'll plunge into our dialogue. First, Ai-jen Poo, who the Secretary also started to introduce, is the Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and co-director of Caring Across Generations. She's been organizing immigrant workers for years, and she's been recognized by many for her leadership. Two of my favorites are Time's list of the 100 most influential people in the world and Newsweek's 150 fearless women list. And then to her left is Patricia Hsu, who's the director of our Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. It's the civil rights agency in the Department of Labor. She also serves as the Secretary of Labor's representative on the Federal Interagency Working Group for APIs. And she's known to many of us as a longtime civil rights leader from all of her work in San Francisco, where she advocated on behalf of Asian Americans and other workers. So we're here today to think about how we can bring in the words of the Secretary, the trailblazers who were the Chinese railroad workers really were the first in a long line of Asian Americans who've contributed to our society, to our economy. And I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn from their experience and a lot of analogies we can draw. Although a lot of things have changed, some things have stayed the same or are pretty similar. So what I'd like to do is to open it up to our panelists to talk about some similarities we see from then to today. What are some of the opportunities and challenges we see for Asian American workers in the U.S.? Ai-jen, do you want to kick off?
Absolutely. So I just have to start by saying, as an Asian American, Chinese American labor organizer, just what an incredible honor it is to be here, and how proud I am that we have a Secretary of Labor and an administration that would make this historic wrong and this incredibly powerful story visible and part of our history officially. So please join me in thanking him for his leadership and this administration. It's really very emotional for me. And I'd like to also say that Chinese American workers also helped build the West as domestic workers. Both Chinese American men and women worked as domestic workers, particularly in California and Hawaii, and that's also a very important, less visible part of our history to acknowledge. And I just think there's so many parallels to today in terms of what we see in today's economy. Asian workers are still helping to build the very infrastructure that this entire 21st century economy is being built upon, whether it's in science and technology, or it's the care workers, the nannies, who help take care of the children of families who go to work every day, or the taxi drivers in New York City who make sure our professionals get to their meetings on time. There's this invisible architecture upon which our 21st century economy is being built, and Asian workers are playing a tremendous role in building and carrying that work forward. And I'd also say that we face some similar challenges in that Asian workers are still overly represented in positions of vulnerability within our economy. There's large concentrations of Asian workers who are survivors of labor trafficking. In fact, just last weekend, a group of our members from Casa de Maryland, which is an immigrant organization right here in Maryland, as well as Adhikar for Human Rights, a Nepali domestic worker organization in New York, just went and rescued a Nepali labor trafficking survivor who was trafficked for 13 years right here in Virginia. And so there's still these cases that are happening, which is why it's so important that we continue to shore up conditions for the most vulnerable workers in our economy. And why it's so important that measures like the regulatory change that the Department of Labor moved forward and is going to be implemented in 2015 that will bring 1.8 million home care workers and caregivers under minimum wage protections for the first time in 75 years. Huge accomplishment. huge accomplishment, and we estimate that at least 10% of the home care workers and caregivers who will benefit from these protections are Asian American workers. So huge, we have so much to do, so we've come so far, and there's so many lessons to be drawn in this moment.
Thank you, Ajahn. When you said those words, invisible architecture, I think are so resonant. I was talking before the event started with some of the descendants in the hallway, and I remember when I was a little girl growing up, I was at a Chinese community event. There were about 100 of us families, I think. I grew up in upstate New York, so it was not often I saw an Asian person I didn't know already. But I was talking to another little girl, and I said, "Where did your parents immigrate from?" And she said, "San Francisco." We're fourth generation. I said, "How can there be fourth generation?" I didn't know, because I didn't know. I didn't know that the railroad workers had come, and we still often don't know about the other Asian American workers who are here, what they're doing, Asian and Asian American workers, and sort of knowledge and being sure we understand their situations and can help them is such an important part, I think, not only of understanding our history, but understanding what we can do today to advance labor rights. So Pat, this is something I know you've worked on and thought about a lot, and in your current position at OFCCP, providing that information and knowledge is a huge part of what you do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First, I just wanted to thank the Secretary. This is like with you, a very personal moment for me. About 30 years ago, actually, when I was a junior at UC Berkeley, I spent some time studying the history of the Chinese railroad workers, and it has been such a pleasure to have just a few minutes to just chat with some of the descendants and hear their stories. So thank you all for your work. At the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, we are the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Labor. We protect the rights of the 25% of the American workforce who work for federal contractors. We protect them from employment discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, color, and national origin, disability status, and protected veteran status. And we also ensure that federal contractors who earn between $500 and $700 billion in taxpayer money providing goods and services, also provides an equal footing for everybody, an equal chance. And we do that through enforcing their affirmative action obligations. One of the things we have done here in the Obama administration is we have created both a communications division but also an outreach division, because we are a worker protection agency. And if people don't know who we are and what we do and what we can do on their behalf, we are, I think, of little good to the community. I am so looking forward to the listening sessions that we're going to have around the country to hear about the current conditions of all kinds of vulnerable Asian workers. Someone came up to me yesterday and said, "Well, what do you mean by vulnerable workers? Can they be undocumented? Are they people with criminal records?" I said, yes, everybody. Everybody, we want to hear your stories. We want to hear how we and the Department of Justice and the EOC and the White House Initiative can work together to be more responsive to these needs. It's hard to believe in this day and age, but there continues to be persistent discrimination against Asian Americans in almost every facet of the audits that we do, whether they are lower wage jobs in poultry manufacturers, or even most recently in New York, a case that we recently settled on behalf of engineers, if you can believe it, minority engineers who applied for jobs. Not one minority engineer, not one person of color was hired for that job. And most of those people who were denied the job were qualified and were Asian. And so I take that on as a real issue and a challenge for us. The other issue and challenge for us, and I'm very grateful to our colleagues at BLS, is the importance of granular data. The importance of making sure that we are looking at the sort of data that's necessary to tell the real story about the Asian American community. We are not a monolithic community. We come in different generations from different places with different skills, And it's those cultural differences and other differences that make it very important for us to be able to address in a precise way exactly how we can remedy some of the issues of discrimination in education. Good data is the foundation of good policy, and good policy is the foundation of a strategic and effective enforcement. Just the one other thing, if I could just mention in terms of your initial question, the similarities. One of the things I was struck by when I was studying this issue so many years ago is that these workers were called celestials. And I have noticed throughout the history of this country that using words to objectify people, to justify treating them in a demeaning way, is something that we need to work on. But despite being called mean names, despite being treated so poorly, not being paid, being burned out from one Chinatown to another by other workers, these Chinese workers persevered, and they embodied the very best spirit, I think, of what America has to offer. And I'm just so proud as I sit here to be someone of Chinese American descent.
So looking out, I mean, I think we have an amazing crowd with us here today. We have descendants, we have wonderful DOL and other governmental employees of Asian American descent. We have advocates and activists. And in this month, AAPI Heritage Month, what do you see and what are you working on? What do you think we and the government can do? What do you think people and community organizations can do to sort of take the next steps to be sure that we're addressing the needs of vulnerable and AAPI workers? Hai-Jin, do you have any thoughts?
I think this right here is an incredible step forward, just to start to make visible the stories that of Asian workers, both in our history and today. I think that Asians will continue to drive innovation at every level of this economy, and we're connected globally. We are part of a global economy in which Asian workers will play a huge role globally, and the fact that all of this innovation is happening, whether it's home care workers who are innovating the future of care for people with Alzheimer's, to people in Silicon Valley who are innovating the future of technology. I think that that innovation is really important to lift up. And I think it's really important to lift up the innovation that's happening in advocacy and organizing in the Asian community, from garment workers who started organizing in the 90s and restaurant workers who were organizing in the 90s to today, the tremendous taxi driver organizing that's happening around the country, and Filipino domestic workers in Los Angeles who are building committees and apps to communicate with each other. There's just fantastic organizing that's happening among Asian low-wage workers that is about telling this story and innovating the future. So we can lift up those stories and support that work and those leaders, because it is happening and it's incredibly exciting and inspiring.
Wonderful. Well, we've just been joined by Congresswoman Grace Meng. Thank you so much. We're delighted you can make it. We know you have a very busy schedule in the House. Appreciate you being here. We've just been talking a little bit about how, the situation of the Chinese railroad workers. In many ways, there are a lot of lessons we can learn for Asian American workers today. Issues of invisibility, of low wages, of marginal status sometimes make it very difficult for workers to come forward. And we've also talked about, some of the wonderful strengths of our communities coming forward and organizing, working together, both to be seen and also to improve working conditions. Congresswoman, I was wondering if you could talk about, first of all, I should do a brief introduction. Congresswoman Grace Meng represents the 6th Congressional District in New York. She has a number of Asian American constituents, and she's also the first Asian American member of Congress from New York State. I sort of couldn't believe that when I read that. I thought it must be wrong, but we really appreciate you being here, and we were hoping you could share with us some thoughts from talking with your constituents, from representing them first in the Assembly and then in Congress, about what you see as some of the issues on the forefront for Asian American workers and communities.
Sure. Well, first of all, I do want to apologize for being tardy, and it's such an honor to be here. Secretary Perez, Deputy Secretary Liu, Secretary Mineta, and all of our community leaders in this room. And it's an honor to join both of you on stage today. This is an issue that is still very important, and we don't necessarily have all the solutions, even right in our own communities. We see cases all the time in our district offices where people come in, they don't necessarily know about existing state and federal laws about wages and working conditions and safety conditions. And so it's something that we still have to do a lot of work on, and we depend on a lot of our leaders in the room today also to get the word out and to educate a lot of our workers. And obviously there are language obstacles and a bunch of reasons, but we still have to work very hard on that.
Mentioned earlier the importance of data, and our communities are diverse, right? Saying Asian American doesn't. Is it me? Saying Asian American means many different things, and it's many different languages. The barriers are different for different populations. People came at different times. They have different educational experiences. I sort of pose this to both of you, Pat and Congresswoman Meng. What can we do to be sure that we're meeting those diversity of needs, and meeting people where they are and providing the services they need?
Well, as I said before, a lot of how we detect the problems and sort of the patterns that are going on, whether it's, let's say, in the field of construction, the restaurant field, are about individual complaints that come forward. And a lot of labor groups, we're trying to get them to work more in terms of diversity and language access to inform workers about a lot of the issues. And to let them know that it's okay to come forward. A lot of them, even if they do know the laws and the regulations, they're still scared to come forward. There could be immigration issues at hand, and that really plays a lot into it too. They feel very threatened, whether it's for themselves who are suffering or for their families. And that's why, always have to make a plug for the importance of passing comprehensive immigration reform. It ties into this very much so.
I guess what I would say is that I view my role in government as giving me an opportunity to really listen and learn from community-based organizations. I think that that should inform our agenda and it should inform our strategies, but not just the community-based organizations, all of our other stakeholders, which are federal contractors. I think we can build a bridge. And we're trying to build that bridge right now with federal contractors on Section 503 in VEVRA so that people with different interests can come together and understand where they can meet and how they can succeed together. But we really, I think, I need to do a much better job of making sure that we know what's really going on the ground. We are regulators, we do have a different role, but we need to be informed on a pretty much consistent basis across the country about the different issues that affect all of the people that we are there to serve.
I know you've worked with, there's a large contingent of Asian American workers among domestic workers, but they come from all different backgrounds. What strategies for success have you found in working with that diverse group?
Well, I think just in terms of partnership, right, with government and really making sure that our solutions are particular to the particular experiences within different Asian communities. I know when you think about the Southeast Asian refugee community, for example, there are very different realities in relationship to work than in the Chinese immigrant community. And even within the Chinese immigrant community, there are very different experiences. And so I think for us to understand those specificities and for everyone in the community to get civically engaged. It's a trend actually that's trending up in our communities where more and more of our members of our communities are getting active, they're mobilizing, they're organizing, they're mobilizing as voters and as community members and as workers. And in fact, a friend of mine at SEIU in Los Angeles, the Long-Term Care Workers Union, says that the 15,000 Chinese workers that are members of her union are the most active when it comes to every election cycle. Most of them don't speak English, and yet they're out there doing volunteer canvass, engaging voters, mobilizing voters, and I just think that that's so key. So it's part of what we have to do to move this forward.
You know, I think that sort of brings us full circle to where we started today. As we know, the history of the labor movement often has involved organizing, and often a lot of that organizing has coincided with ethnic solidarity. And so that's something that we still see today in the United States. I know that we are running a little short on time, and Congresswoman, since you didn't have the opportunity to start, I mean, I do want to say for myself, it is such an honor, as both Pat and Ai-jen alluded to. It's an honor to be here as a Chinese American. It's a really historic moment. So I would like to give you the chance to say a few words, if you'd like to, sort of on this occasion, and other thoughts you may have to share with the audience.
Well, first of all, I just really want to thank you for allowing me to be part of this amazing occasion. It's as a Chinese American, and as a daughter of immigrants, it's so meaningful to be here in this room and to talk about issues and how we still need to go forward solving them. This is something that, you know, as you said, electoral participation, civic participation is something that is still very important. We talk a lot about, a lot of people talk about how much and how quickly the AAPI population is growing throughout the country. But I always remind people that we need to make sure that our voting participation, you know, regardless of party and, you know, whatever affiliation, but the voting participation and the registration of voters has to be at a very similar percentage also in its increase. And so that's really what makes whatever issues that we're working on, you know, as is often said, immigration, worker rights, safety conditions of workplace, it's not just an AAPI issue. And so these are areas where our community can easily join forces and build coalitions and build bridges, as we were talking about. And it's very important that our community groups, our civic groups within each of our communities, obviously I'm from New York, but we are so thankful for the work that you do, because our constituents feel comfortable going to these community groups. They feel comfortable because of language abilities. And so we need to make that happen on even a wider scale. And that's really the way that we're able to detect whatever problems there are and get the data and ultimately find solutions. But, you know, I'm just very proud to be here today. Thank you so much.
Any last words from our panelists? I think on behalf of all of us, so it's a wonderful occasion. We want to thank the families who are so honored to have the chance to meet with you. And I'm also honored to be on this panel with people who are continuing the fight, as Secretary Perez alluded to, and keeping up the good work that the people here on the stage and all.
Thank you.
So I also have the pleasure of introducing our last speaker today. Today we've been talking about the past and the present and maybe some of the future for Asian American workers. So there's no better person to conclude our program, I think, than Secretary and former Congressman Norm Mineta. We started with remembering that the Chinese workers who 150 years ago toiled to build this nation's great railroads, but their work was unsung and for many years erased from the history books. And we end in the modern day with Norm Mineta, who fittingly served as our Secretary of Transportation. So these experiences couldn't be more different yet, and there are still many similarities. We celebrate the pioneering spirit of the Chinese railroad workers, and Secretary Mineta himself has been a pioneer and pathbreaker. I think I'm preaching to people who probably know a lot of this already, but I can't resist but repeat some of his illustrious accomplishments. His long career as a politician includes many firsts: the first Asian American mayor of a major American city, first chair and co-founder of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the first Asian Pacific American to serve in the president's cabinet, initially as Secretary of Commerce under President Bill Clinton, and later under President George Bush. Today is also about workers who literally laid new paths for others to follow, but it's also about remembrance. It's about honoring those who came before us and making sure our history books tell their story. Here, too, Secretary Mineta has played a pivotal part in our history. During World War II, he and his family were among the 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry who were forced into internment. This is a dark chapter in our history, one that for many decades was glossed over or forgotten. But after he became a member of Congress, then Representative Mineta waged a decade-long campaign to secure passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which not only officially apologized for and offered restitution for the injustices endured by Japanese Americans during the war, but also made provision for education about those injustices so they would not be perpetrated again. For his trailblazing leadership and his contributions to civil rights, Secretary Mineta has received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, our nation's highest civilian honor. And for his service to his community and his country, he has garnered the respect of and confidence not only of presidents, but of the American people. And I think I can speak for all of us here in this room. He also has the admiration and gratitude of Asian Americans and all of us called to public service around this country. So please join me in welcoming Secretary Norm Mineta.
Thank you very much, everybody. Portia, thank you very much for that very kind and generous introduction, and congratulations to you for being Assistant Secretary of Labor for Employment and Training. Your work at the Domestic Policy Council, quite sure, served you in good stead in preparing you for the job you have now, and so we look forward to your accomplishments. And to Secretary Tom Perez, person I'd like to say I've known a long time. I can't call him an old friend, but he's a friend of long standing and had an outstanding record as Secretary of Labor, working for Governor O'Malley. I'm sorry. Don't tell him I couldn't remember it. So in any event, Tom had a great record with Governor O'Malley in the state of Maryland before becoming Assistant U.S. Attorney General for Civil Rights. So Tom brings a great deal of background and experience to his job at Secretary of Labor, and this celebration today is an indication of the type of leadership that he's bringing to his job. For me, it really is an honor for me to be here today, especially as this event ties together two incredibly important threads of my life. First, as an Asian Pacific American, and secondly, as a former Secretary of Transportation. Incidentally, if my voice breaks, I want you to know I'm just getting over a summer cold. There's nothing worse than a summer cold, so I'm not going through puberty. It's just that bad summer cold. So let me talk to you about these two ties. When talking about transportation, those of us who work in the field tend to find ourselves drawn to metaphors that fit the various modes of transportation that we're talking about. For example, one of the people here in this room is a gentleman by the name of Bruce Carlton. And he is now, right from, wave your hand, Bruce. Bruce is now the president and CEO of the National Industrial Transportation League. And I first got to know Bruce when I became Secretary of Transportation and he was the acting administrator of the Maritime Administration, where he helped me really become on course and set a true course. There were times when that course was choppy, and we got blown off course from the time, and Bruce, with his hard work, got us back on course, wherever it might have been. Now, people who work in transportation are used to their contributions being occasionally overlooked or even taken for granted. Infrastructure is seen by many as a very boring word. But what they don't understand is that infrastructure is the foundation on which everything else is built. The Transcontinental Railroad was one of the largest and most dramatic examples of infrastructure ever constructed in human history. It would not be perhaps until the construction of the interstate highway or the Apollo program that the United States would undertake any transportation program of this kind of size or scope and vision. Now, when Congress authorized the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, the cost in 1862 was $136 million. It was twice the size of the federal budget for the previous year. And on top of this, this was undertaken at the height of the Civil War. Americans don't give up, and we don't get blown off course, at least not for long. So to accomplish this job, they needed a different kind of infrastructure. People with courage, with vision, skill, and dedication. When some objections were raised to hiring laborers of Chinese ancestry, the observation was made that China had built the Great Wall of China and had invented gunpowder. Surely they could build a railroad. And so we are here today to celebrate the fact that they did. But more importantly, I believe, is that we are here to celebrate what people can do when they are given the chance to show what they can do. Speaking as a former Secretary of Transportation, I want to express my personal appreciation for the work of the men and women of the United States Department of Labor. You spend every day doing everything you can to ensure that people are valued for the work that they do, because when that happens, there's nothing that can't be built. I will pay you the highest compliment that a transportation nerd like me can pay anyone. Your dedication to building up people makes your work the infrastructure of infrastructure. You look out for the safety of workers, you look out for the wages and the kinds of fairness in terms of people being paid for what they do. And so I was incredibly honored earlier to meet with the descendants of some of those Chinese American workers who built the first and among the greatest of infrastructure projects. I know some people would be tempted to point out that legally speaking, they were not Americans. They were barred from that status by prejudice. And ironically, that was done in the midst of a war that was in part seeking to undo that prejudice. As an American of Japanese ancestry, who once had his citizenship reduced to the status of non-alien, when we were being evacuated, there were these large placards being put on utility poles and sides of buildings. And it said, to all those of Japanese ancestry, alien and non-alien. And as a 10-year-old kid, I looked at the sign and thought, what's a non-alien? It's a citizen. But our own government in 1942 wasn't willing to acknowledge even us as citizens. And so when's the last time that you stood up, beat your chest, and said, I am a proud non-alien of the United States of America? I don't think you have. And that's why I cherish the word citizen, because my own government wasn't willing to acknowledge us as citizens. And so we were forced from our homes and into internment camps, and I've acquired a healthy disrespect for the state of the law in past eras in this great nation's history. Now, where the workers we gather, were the workers that we gather here to honor today of Chinese ancestry? Definitely yes. Did the law consider them to be Americans? No. But the test of history gives the lie to that lie, because the United States of America wouldn't be the America we know without them. We should never forget the injustices of the past. We should never sweep those things under the rug. Neither, however, should we perpetuate the effects of those injustices. The dedicated laborers and workers who we gather here today to honor made themselves Americans by helping us to make America. Other people living at the time they lived did not or would not recognize that fact. So, again, I want to thank Secretary Perez, Deputy Secretary Liu, the Department of Labor, for allowing me to be a part of this ceremony today of finally fixing that mistake. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary Mineta. You continue to inspire us each and every day with your service and your words. I'd like to acknowledge again our other special guest, Congresswoman Grace Meng, who is a friend of mine. Is this struggle for workers' rights was begun by Asian American men. It is appropriate that it is living on through Asian American women, wonderful pioneers. Wonderful pioneers like Grace Meng, and it is also appropriate that the two Chinese Americans who currently serve in Congress, one represents New York and one represents California, and that bi-coastal link is very much like the railroad that we are here commemorating. So let me thank our program participants again for joining us for this event. And now I'd like to invite folks to go outside the auditorium, where we will unveil the plaque dedicated to the Chinese railroad workers in the labor of honor. So thank you all for being with us here today. Congratulations.